hope everyone enjoyed lunch and have some fresh energy for the next session. So, as you do after eating, you have a digestive, no? So, all the way from Italy, we have Farmily for our next collaboration.
Ciao a tutti, I'm Carlo.
And I am Benjamin. Hi to all.
Okay, we are Farmily. We are 2 of 7 partners that run Farmily. What we want to do today is present our collab product, and then we want to talk to you about what we are and what we will be. Let's start where we come from. We come from Milano, as you know, Milano da Bere. And we run 5 bars in this city before we start creating spirits. The first one was the Mac Cafe, a high volume bar, and then we create the Backdoor 43, that is the smallest bar in the world. And then we moved to the 1930 Secret Bar.
So after these experiences, we decided 3 years ago to found our own company, and we made spirits. The brand is Farmily. It's important to know that Farmily, it means the family of the farm. But why? Like when we manage bars, we decided to manage all this company like a family. And we decided to open with a spirit productions, such a farm and such a family. Because for our own spirits, we bring by the herd, like a farm, and we produce spirits like a family. And we have 2 different spirits, but for this afternoon and for all of you, we decided to launch a new spirit.
Yeah, the new spirit starts with a name. The name is Wave. How about Wave? Wave is the form, the mood, like the water shows its power. And then it's also the name of all the people that now are care about the pollution, the environment, and the sustainability of this world. We start from the water and we move to the ocean. Why the ocean?
So, like if in the past we bring by the herd our own botanicals to make spirits, we decided for poor to bring by the ocean the botanical to make these special spirits. Is it a really interesting digestive for you after lunch? And the idea is to bring by the oceans different natural and easy botanicals. The most important are the seaweeds. So we really like experimentation, and for this amazing project we decided to distill with a vacuum still 7 different type of seaweeds. And after that, we bring by the sea also salt, and we distill it. And we are not so rich, and we can work with oyster, proper oyster. And we decided to bring only the shells. So, is it an important ingredient? Because it is like the base of the spirit.
But before we eat the oysters.
The last ingredients, more important or less important, I don't know, it is the plankton. This is why we can taste these spirits, these compound spirits, distilled from 30 degrees, from 42 degrees. So super fresh spirits made by the sea, only by the sea.
So we hope that you enjoy our new product, and as we always say after our masterclass all around the world, we said grazie, but the most important thing, we always said that it's important to do our job and do great, but the most important thing is fate l'amore, so make love.
Amazing. So, on that note, we often think about sustainability as purely environmental. However, it is not. And ironically, in an industry that lives of taking care of people, we often forget the true cost of hospitality. So, please welcome to the stage, Narit Gessler.
Hello everyone. First I want to say thank you to the core team for inviting me here today, but also a big thank you to you for coming out to learn and to better understand your industry. So every day we use words, but do we really know what they mean? So today's theme is understanding, and when I started putting this presentation together, I thought I better define the word understanding. So I consulted everyone's best friend, Google. Here's what we got. So, definition of understanding. We have 4 ones for some reason, but we'll start with the first one. The first one being a mental grasp or comprehension. So, I have no understanding of mixology. Number 2 would be intellect. I have the facilities to understand Italian. Number 3, an informal agreement or an arrangement. So, he and I, we had an arrangement. And the 4th one would be a sympathetic awareness, consideration. This is a topic that is heavy, and to work on it, it takes understanding. And this is where I'm going to focus today. Now, when we look at this, we can see that there are synonyms here. Decency, humanity, compassion, and the exact opposite, the antonyms, ignorance, indifference. So, you might be wondering, what do these 2 photos have in common? It's a trick question because what really is in common is just me. So in the first photo, as you can see, I'm standing in front of a bunch of vodka. This photo was taken in Vienna, where my family produces alcohol. The second photo is me kissing an elephant named Didi in Thailand. So before we get started today, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my journey and how I came here. So I grew up in the alcohol industry. Our family company, we have 2, Altwasser Gessler and Jay Bachevsky. They've been around for over 200 years, and it has stayed in my family the entire time. We used to be the purveyors to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and today our vodka Monokulova is sold globally. Now, there's another part of me. I also have a master's in human rights, and this is what took me to Thailand to do pro bono work with an anti-trafficking organization. And it was here that I was introduced to mahouts. Now mahouts are elephant trainers. So when you think you go to Thailand and you see tourism and people are spending time with elephants, who's training them? I came to learn that many of the mahouts had actually been trafficked from neighboring Burma. And let me tell you, during those 6 months in Thailand, I had some bad days. We all have bad days. But what I came to understand there is that people in slavery, every day is the worst day of their lives. And this is how I came to work for my current organization, Free the Slaves. And our mission is to liberate people that are enslaved and to change the conditions that allow slavery to persist. So today, I'm standing here before you as somebody that's very much a part of your industry, but I'm also an anti-slavery advocate. Let's try again. There we go. So, slavery isn't legal anywhere, but it happens everywhere. How many people learned in school that slavery was abolished? I did. That was definitely what I was told. Let's talk a little bit about that. So, trafficking and slavery, these 2 words, they can often be intertwined and a little confusing. The way we understand trafficking is really the movement of a person from one place to another. But slavery is what happens once they arrive. Now, legally, these are protected under the same laws, and people don't have to be moved for laws to apply for trafficking and slavery. So let's take a look at what the UN says. Now, the UN is taking a look at definitions and the act, the means, and the purpose. So the way I like to think of it is what Why? How? Let's flip them around a little bit. So what? You're being trafficked. How? By means of violence. And for what purpose? Slavery. Modern day slavery shows up in many forms these days. We see debt bondage. This is where people are paying off a loan and they get enslaved. Contract slavery. This often happens when contracts are misrepresented. They're falsified. People get stuck. Serfdom, something we used to hear about maybe back in Shakespeare's days. This still exists. This is when people are tied for generations to the land that they're on. We have forced labor, domestic servitude, sex trafficking, forced marriage, child slavery, and worst forms of child labor. Now that last one, what differentiates it from the one above is really the hazardous working conditions that the children are in. This can be often fatal environments. So slavery by the numbers. This is no small issue. Slavery generates $150 billion every year for traffickers on the backs of more than 40 million people. Of that, 50% are in forced labor, 71% are women, and over 25% are children under the age of 25. Now, let's jump back to the 1800s. In the 1800s, if I wanted to buy a slave, it would cost me about $1,000. And at the time, that could be anywhere from 3 to 6 times the amount of the American salary. So it was an investment. Today, that amount would be around $40,000. But today, you can buy a bonded laborer for $12. There is no investment. These slaves are disposable. And if they die, there's another one waiting to take their place. So that brings us to today. How does this all relate? So everyone's sort of heard of supply chains, and the way we can think of it is that you have a finished product, but it was probably made in a factory somewhere, and eventually you get back to the raw materials. Across the entire supply chain, you will find instances of slavery. So let's think about this. It's in the cigarettes that we smoke, it's in the cell phones that we use, it's in our clothing, it's in the food that we eat, the medicines that we take, it's in the buildings that we sit in, and it was probably just in your lunch. All right, let's see if you guys can help me out here. Who can spot slavery in this picture? Anyone? Any brave souls? All right, I'll help you. What was that?
T-shirt.
T-shirt. Okay, I got a T-shirt. Good one. Anyone else? Glasses.
The rubber.
The limes.
Limes. Okay.
The rubber.
Yes. So today, these are the 5 things I'll be talking about. It's in our furniture, electronics, simple syrup, clothing, and alcohol. So do you really know what's behind your bar? Let's talk a little bit about furniture. I'm going to specifically talk about steel. So these benches that you're all sitting on, if you look underneath them, steel. Now a big component in steel is pig iron. And in order to make pig iron, you need charcoal. And in order to make charcoal, you need to burn wood. So this particular picture here, this was taken from Free the Slaves in Brazil. Now Brazil was the last country in the Americas to outlaw slavery in 1888. However, most of the iron, most of the pig iron that goes into steel this day can be traced back to Brazil. These workers are working in hazardous conditions, they often are breathing in chemicals, they live in places that don't have latrines or electricity, and they're forced to be there. Electronics. Everyone in this room has a smartphone. Now, smartphones contain over 70 minerals, one of them being coltan. Coltan is in all of our cell phones, and it is mined in the Democratic Republic of the Congo by children. Now, these mines are not formal. They're holes in the ground. They can flood with water. They can collapse. This is an extremely hazardous place for a child to work. Now, on top of that, the mines usually have sex trafficking going on around them because the people that own the mines want to stay occupied. Now, I think about this, and I think about my cell phone and all of our cell phones, and can you imagine if just one of the major retailers said, I'm not going to buy any coltan that was tainted with child slavery? What a difference that would make for those kids in the Congo. Huge one. Simple syrup, everyone's favorite sweetener. This goes into the majority of cocktails, right? Now, simple syrup is really just a combination of what? Water and sugar. Sugar, 170 million tons is produced annually, but where does it come from? So the raw ingredient for sugar is sugarcane. Now, how do we harvest sugarcane? Sugarcane, often the fields are burned, and this gets rid of dead organic material. And then people have to go in with machetes and hack them down to get the sugarcane. Now, sugarcane has a very short shelf life. It needs to go into production pretty much immediately. Someone has to haul it, has to be pulverized. We get raw sugar out of there, and from the raw sugar, it gets sent somewhere else for refinement to come to you to make simple syrup. But unfortunately, what we see in agriculture, and especially in sugar plantations, children as young as 5 are being put into the plantations. They cannot leave. On top of it, women are often sexually assaulted if they're working there. So let's talk clothing. Everyone here is pretty much wearing a t-shirt of some point. That means that 70% of all of our clothes in here probably have cotton in them. Now, cotton needs to be picked, often by little hands. It needs to be spun and woven into thread, into yarn, and then it will go to a factory where it is turned into your t-shirt. Now, I don't know if any of you remember this, but in 2013, a big factory collapsed in Bangladesh. It killed 1,500 people and injured an additional 2,500. Now, this particular instance makes me pretty angry. When they've talked to workers, they found out that the workers the day before started hearing the building creaking, moaning. They saw cracks coming down the walls. They weren't allowed to leave. Can you imagine sitting in there knowing this building is going to collapse on you? They didn't have a choice because they were enslaved. So let's talk alcohol. Alcohol can be made from many products. We have wheat, corn, potatoes, rice, fruit. All of these things are done with agriculture. Agriculture specifically targets migrant workers. It targets people that are moving because of seasonality. Here we see contract slavery. We see horrible working conditions. We see many, many, many long hours. And no matter what kind of alcohol you're using, if you trace back that raw ingredient, chances are good you're going to come to slavery inside of the alcohol industry. So you're probably sitting here wondering, okay, there's some big issues going on here. What's happening? The truth is, not a lot, but some. So we now have 5 places with modern day slavery acts: California, the UK, France, Germany, and Australia. The regulations are coming. So even if your only purpose is to sit there and think, as a business owner, I should get this in check, fine, but you should also do it because it's the right thing to do. Transparency right now is going to lead to accountability, and eventually that leads to liability. That's where we're hoping to see these modern day slavery acts going. Just about a week ago, Theresa May was presenting to the International Labor Conference, where she was really urging other governments to put modern day slavery acts into place. And specifically, she says, quote, "Buying something from a company that uses slave labor should not be any less socially unacceptable than using a disposable cup." 10 years ago, single-use plastics were fine. We all use them. Today, companies are taking them out of their supply chains because they know how consumers feel. Right now, we have an opportunity. We're the next generation. We can join an anti-slavery movement, and we can make a difference as consumers to say, we don't want this in our supply chains. So what can you do? How do you take action? There's a lot of different ways. The first is to get educated. As we talked about, many of us learned that slavery was abolished. Not true. You can learn about where it's happening, with what products. You can trace it. You can look at iLab's Sweat and Toil. You can look up a lime and see where are the worst places to source lime from. You can, for instance, go onto Made in a Free World and check out your own slavery footprint. Or you can order your t-shirts. I mean, how many bars have branded t-shirts in them? Like mine from Set, which is a very cool company that's working in India, and they employ trafficking survivors. They give them skills, they give them a fair wage, and then they help them reintegrate back into their homes. So you have a choice. Everyone has a role in this industry, whether you're a brewer, a distiller, whether you're a company owner, a bar owner, a brand ambassador, or a bartender, you can do something. Even if it's to come up with a really creative cocktail and maybe partner with a nonprofit and give some of the proceeds back. You have a voice and you can use it. So I want to give you just a quick video to see what freedom looks like. Huh? Can we play the video? Maybe not. I can't. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about what I was going to say after the video. There's something we call the freedom dividend. And so it's all of the things that come out of freedom. If you're not free, you can't get an education, you can't go to the doctor, you can't do all of the things that we enjoy today. So pretty much everything that we do, it starts with freedom, and freedom starts with you. And I'd love to be able to show you my next slide, but what I see is a sand dune at the moment. Here we go. Shall we try again? We know from our original definitions that understanding equals decency. It's the same as humanity and it's the same as compassion. Now that you know about this, we're talking about changing lives. The products that you use, that you sell, that you distribute, and how they relate back to the people that make them. You are free and you have a choice, whereas many others do not. And so I'll leave you with a final thought, which is that there's an old saying that says, knowledge is power. But knowledge without action is useless. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Narit. I think you opened a lot of eyes today. Our next collaborator has been with us several times, so please welcome Adam from Jarr Kombucha to the stage.
Hey guys, thank you for having us today. My name is Adam Vani, and I am one of the founders of Jarr Kombucha. Let me get this slide. Hold on a sec here. Up, down, down. Yeah. It's not working, sorry. There we go, cool. So we are a kombucha brewery based in Hackney Wick, about 10 minutes from here down the road. Now we ferment in stainless steel vessels like this, and we hand bottle and produce and package everything by a small team in our brewery. We, a few years ago in 2015, we launched a range of bottled products, and these are the three, you may have seen them around before. We're mainly sold in London, but we're also found across kind of Amsterdam as well as France. We also serve our kombucha on tap. So It was always our feeling that kombucha should be enjoyed as an alcohol alternative, and it should be enjoyed on draft as well as in bottle. And actually, at Monica and Alex's new bar, we have our hemp kombucha on tap, which is the one that we launched in 2017 at the Pour Symposium. Kombucha is also great as a cocktail mixer. You can find our kombucha, as well as many other kombuchas, like Freya's company Fixate, who's here today, in various cocktails around London. It's a great mixer. It cuts through due to the acidity. So for those of you who don't know what kombucha is fermented tea. It comes from ancient China originally. It was brewed about 2,500 years ago during the Qin dynasty as a longevity elixir. It then became popular sort of in the past 15 years, mainly in the wellness scene, where kombucha has been brewed as kind of a healthy, low-sugar soft drink. What we decided to do this year was we walked outside of our brewery a couple months ago and realized there are loads of fig trees everywhere. So we thought, what would it be like to ferment fig leaves in the same way that we would do with tea leaves? And then we took it up a notch. We decided to make it boozy. But going back to fig leaves, throughout history, fig leaves have been kind of this magical thing. This is kind of an image of the Buddha gaining enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, which was actually underneath a fig tree. In early depictions of Adam and Eve, they were covered in fig leaves, as well as in Greek statues. Now, how did we do this? What we did was we took a bunch of fig leaves and their buds straight from the trees. We steeped them in about 100-degree water for 15 minutes. We then blended that with our original kombucha directly out of the tank. Our original kombucha is made with organic gunpowder green tea and an organic tea guanyin oolong tea. So we blended the fig leaf tea and our organic oolong and green tea together with organic cane sugar, and then we fermented it with a champagne yeast at 30 degrees for 7 days. We did it in these Cornelius kegs. And this was the first time we'd ever done anything like this. We didn't really know what would happen. We didn't know how it would taste. But it turned out pretty good. And basically, we wanted to create a new understanding of kombucha, not just as a health drink, but and also not just as a non-alcoholic drink, but as an alcoholic drink in its own right. So this is about 12%, and we hope you guys enjoy it. It has kind of umami notes, it has port notes, it has loads of different stuff going on. But yeah, please give us some feedback. It's our first time doing this. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for having us. Enjoy the rest of the day.
So, continuing on the note of fermentation, I think our next speakers are a very good example of only if you truly understand something can you change, innovate, or improve something. So please welcome Lars and Chris from Empirical Spirit.
Hi, we're Empirical Spirits from Copenhagen. I'd like to thank Alex and Monica for inviting us and for continuing to hold what is the most compelling symposium in the drinks business. I'd also like to say happy birthday to Andrew. Is that you, Andrew? Andrew's our head distiller, and he's here tonight. Fermentation is often thought of as this black box, this kind of magic space where you just kind of put things and they evolve, they change, they happen. What we're going to try and do today is lift a small corner of that black box. In a very strict biochemical sense, fermentation is a metabolic process where microbes convert sugars into another substance in the absence of oxygen. In a colloquial sense, fermentation is a formation of food by microbes and the enzymes produced by microbes. For all of you who are doing fermentations in your bars, in your wardrobes, in your bathrooms, or wherever it is, there's 6 critical things that you need to understand and control in any fermentation. That's salt, pH, oxygen, the substrate, that is there sugar, is there food for the microbe, humidity, and temperature.
And throughout the talk, I'm going to nip in and out and talk about how this relates into making delicious things in the glass or on our plates.
But ultimately, why care about fermentation, right? Like, it's easy enough to get a bottle of wine, it's easy enough to get a bottle of beer. We buy chocolate, we buy bread. This is a culinary representation of what the world is like to me without fermentation, without my control of fermentation. It's boring, it's staid, there's no excitement. It's like that. We also don't consider that when we're buying bread or wine, or plucking a leaf of the mint or the basil or whatever it is, herb or spice that you're putting into a cocktail or a drink, that it's not just plucking the leaf. There's this intense and very complicated biochemical machine that's creating all these flavor compounds. This is millions, billions of years of evolution that's led up to this. What fermentation allows us to do is kind of pull back the hood from that engine, stick our hands in, and kind of start controlling that process.
So over an incredibly long time, the following of microbes, humans are gaining understanding of fermentation to make more appetizing things than the hot dog and mash cake you just seen, which is kind of a bit strange. So we're going to now move into how we at Empirical use this knowledge through spirits as a vessel.
So this is Ariel Johnson, a food scientist that I had the pleasure of working with for a number of years, and what she's holding up is flavor compounds that ants use as communications stressors, essentially. This is how we became friends, because I was geeking out about something and she geeked about something in her field, and we became close collaborators. But the point is this, that ants have created things that we consider flavor compounds, like lemongrass, like leather, like mint, for communication purposes. We can create the same things with microbes in terms of processing substrates and using microbes within certain parameters to achieve those flavors. It's one of the important things, and we're going to talk about this throughout the evening, is that fermentation is primarily a nurturing endeavor. We are dealing with living microbes, and each one of those needs certain parameters to be healthy, to be successful. It's like trying to raise children and getting them into a good kindergarten so they can go to a good university. We have to provide like a stability for them, the great food, the great environment, and make sure that they're happy in every step of the way. This is an example of this. This is outside of the fermentation room of someone who's considered the world's best katsuobushi producer. Katsuobushi is a Japanese process. It's a little bit too involved to get to this evening. But this is the music list that he plays to the microbes that are fermenting the katsuobushi. So he feels that Mozart is this beautiful, serene environment where his microbes will be at their best. This isn't to suggest that Mozart versus Chopin versus Beethoven or whatever is particularly good for this microbe, but I use it to illustrate the amount of care that this man is putting into his process, that he's so focused on what we think of as mold, that he's playing a playlist that he curates every day for these microbes. Talking about compounds, I'm going to run through a bunch of slides very quickly. These are some common things that different basic microbes produce: lactic acid, acetic acid, glutamic acids, and then alcohols, which are often converted into sugar. A lot of these flavors, as we run through it, diacetyl, cheesy, creamy, buttery, fruity. A lot of these you sort of recognize from wine tasting. If you want to really geek out about it, this is a table that Ariel and I compounded about the different fermentations that were going on in Restaurant Noma at the time. And you start seeing yogurt-like flavors, leather-like flavors, fireplace flavors. All of these are products that are created not from particularly the substrate, so that is, it's not necessarily the grapes, which, not to take anything from wine growers, is part of the main focal point of the process, but it's the way that the microbes themselves are cultivated that produces all of these flavors.
So as you can see from this here slide, there's a lot of testing going on, because as there's, depending on the substrate, the fermentation tool, i.e. like types of microbes, the pH, everything that Lars mentioned earlier, there's a many different array of outcomes that can be possible. So through this here, this is just a small example that we'll get into in more detail later of what we actually go into at Empirical to try and get the certain flavors that we're striving to achieve. But a fun fact about this picture, I don't think any single thing in this whole entire picture ever made it past the testing phase. That's just the kind of the constant dance with microbes that we have, that is fermentation.
Yeah, side note on creativity, it's a 99% failure.
As you can see.
We'll jump into probably the most difficult microbe that we deal with at Empirical Spirits. When I began the distillery, I knew that I wanted to have koji as part of the process because it has this beautiful, delicate floral characteristics, can lend a sense of mushroom, umami. All of these are secondary metabolics created by the aspergillus mold. As it's doing its main thing of converting the starches into simple sugar chains so that, well, for its own purposes, it can feed itself, but for our purposes, we can use it for, say, producing sake. We mix that with malted barley in our grain bill when we're brewing. But this was something, this kind of layering of complexity through fermentation was something that is core to what we do at Empirical Spirits and is also core to how we act as a company. Here you can see Rekka, who's our koji queen. And she's decided that our koji doesn't prefer Mozart, but prefers death metal. And I kind of second her on that. But what I'm highlighting is the care and attention and dedication that she puts into this, and that she puts in every day. It's like the awareness that we're dealing with a living creature. Sometimes we'll have relatively famous chefs and scientists and people coming through our distillery, and they all want to kind of poke their heads into the koji room because it's this real highlight in our space. And Rekka will kind of sternly and steadfastly put her hand out and say, no, Mama's asleep at the moment. Because she understands that with all fermentation, but particularly for her with the koji, it's about nurturing this collaboration. Because fermentation is a collaboration. You're collaborating with the microbes in a careful and measured way to create different flavors. If you raise the temperature in koji, you produce different compounds with different species of aspergillus, say Aspergillus luciensis. If you curl off in the tail of the fermentation by 4 degrees, it produces citric acid. So you get a completely different flavor profile by the small adjustments to the environment and how carefully you're sort of tending your microbe. Oops. Sorry, I skipped over that.
Yes, so this is moving into miso. This is kind of a breakdown of how, a very simplistic breakdown, but very efficient of how miso is made. We're lucky enough to grow, thanks to Rekka, a shitload of koji. So we have the option to make a lot of miso. Fortunately, we're looking into dealing with a lot of our spent products that breweries and distilleries have in a way to utilize this and to actually bring a second product out of it. So such examples of this would be like our spent grain. Spent grain is a huge issue for breweries and distilleries, but we can make spent grain miso or spent grain shoyu, which is absolutely delicious. Also another one is like we're working on like things with katsu. We can make katsu miso, which is like absolutely amazing. Most recently, we did a collaboration with Taylor and Elementary, and there was carob in that blend. Carob brings a beautiful, earthy chocolate note, which is going to make a beautifully rich miso. That's a botanical that most distilleries that deal with botanicals, they just throw them out afterwards. but we're fortunate enough to be able to utilize these and to actually bring a product because it's good to do, essentially.
Yeah, and as a side note, well, we've been quite able to transform a large part of our waste stream using fermentation into different new and novel uses for ourselves. It's important to note that fermentation isn't something that you can do with that thing that's been sitting around in the back of your fridge for 3 weeks and you finally notice it and you say, oh, maybe I can ferment this. It's got to be as fresh and beautiful as possible. If you wouldn't want to eat it immediately, you can't ferment it. This goes doubly for something like, say, squid garum. I think that's one of the misnomers where you're like, oh, it's rotting fish. No. If you take rotten fish and try and make fish garum, you'll have something that smells like a whale washed up into your kitchen and died. Whereas if you take the very fresh sort of squid scraps in this illustration, carefully keep them at the right temperature, you add koji, the right amount of salt, the right amount of liquid, put it in the right temperature, you'll get the most beautiful, velvety, unctuous, umami-rich sauce you've ever tried.
So, going back to earlier that you've seen was pearl barley that we were going, I suppose this was early on. This is actually mandioca. So it's just a different substrate that we're growing the same mold on, but it gives a highly different flavor profile. So as on the pearl barley, you see you get this like nutty, sweet unaminess, but with mandioca it actually highlights the tropical fruitness of this root that when raw is actually toxic, but due to inoculating it with the koji spores, it bypasses that, and then you can actually have this beautiful tropical note. Just by switching the substrate, you have a completely different realm of flavors that are achievable.
And this is something that we try and do as much as we can at Empirical, is by juxtaposing different traditions and products with each other. So we're taking a real staple of South American cuisine, manioc, and we're applying a very Eastern, particularly Japanese technique to it. This allows us to taste the manioc in a very novel way because we don't have to cook it the way you normally have to cook manioc, because manioc naturally has quite a bit of cyanide in it, and so there's usually a heavy cooking process to break that cyanide down. This essentially koji fermentation breaks down the cyanide in the same way, also transforming the starches into sugars, which allows us to make this beautiful wine and then kind of what's essentially a shochu. We've also brought back some really beautifully naturally fermented honey from Brazil. So we're extracting the yeast from that for a secondary trial. We're actually using Brazilian yeast from honey to ferment the Japanese cured manioc. If that, it's really easy to follow.
Long-winded, but great flavor.
This beauty, the gentleman before us just touched on, this is a SCOBY, which is colloquially called a kombucha mother. SCOBY stands for symbiotic construct of bacteria and yeast, so that basically a parallel fermentation. There's some misconception that this mother is actually the organism that produces the fermentation. It's actually a byproduct of the parallel fermentation. So this is a zoological mat of mostly cellulose and more or less inactive yeast and bacteria. It actually forms like a capsicle on top of the whatever vessel you're doing the kombucha fermentation in, sort of protecting the more active microbes that are in the liquid state. Kombucha is kind of one of my favorite fermentations, just because it's very resilient and very adaptable. With again nurturing, taking care of it, you can make it very able to process a really wide range of products. So it's very happy working on 100% fruit juices, 100% vegetable juices, with a little bit of coaxing and cajoling and a small amount of bullying. I was able to get a couple mothers to start consuming lactose, so I could grow them on milk, which allow you to make sort of creme fraiches, yogurts, fresh cheeses. Yeah.
So just if you look at this illustration, you'll see that it says blackcurrant leaves. But just as something I find that is a good way to like illustrates how kombucha can utilize flavors and can bring out certain flavors. Instead of using blackcurrant leaves, recently we used pineapple weed. Pineapple weed it grows everywhere in like the Nordics at this time of year. It's a little weed, it's in the chamomile family. But when you make kombucha out of that air, if you hold it at around like 24 degrees for 48 hours, it'll start tasting less like chamomile tea and will actually take on the beautiful acidity that fresh pineapple just has, and it'll be that fruity. So we can use kombucha to bring out flavors that we can't actually achieve that's around us.
Now we get to the mainstay, so alcohol. So yeast is generally considered for its ability to create alcohol, but in the hands of really skilled brewers like Yuki, like Rodrigo, it's actually a flavor generation machine. It can show incredible complexity in metabolic pathways. I mean, for all intents and purposes, beer is just sweet barley water, wine is just grape juice, right? The differences between them in the same substrate depend on the care that the person doing the brewing or winemaking is applying to it. Low sugar creates different compounds than high sugar. Temperature creates different compounds, whether it's high or low. How much acidity it then produces. Each stress changes the way that the yeast works. Essentially, we're using a metabolic machine that's been evolving for a number of different purposes and allowing us to, again, put our hands on the controls. This is the metabolic pathway of a yeast cell. I just pulled this up quickly to kind of demonstrate each one of these paths is the direction that you can push the flavor in. I'm going to start running very quickly because we're about to spool out of time. So this is an African fruit called matamba. We're starting to collect a lot of different microbe samples every time we go traveling somewhere. So we're harvesting samples from a wine that they make out of matamba, and then also a wine that is traditionally made in village. This is Mafura. Both of these fruits are from Zimbabwe, as one of the projects that we are working with at Empirical Spirits. The idea is to basically collect yeast samples and have a sense of terroir that's a microbial terroir, as opposed to a product terroir. Just going to run through lactic steps. So lactic fermentation is just very simply an illustration of how confining certain parameters in the fermentation will lead to success or failure. Most microbes hate salinity, need oxygen. Lactic acid bacteria deals with this situation very well. We often make a decision in our distillery whether we're going to distill vinegars or kombuchas. This is habanero vinegar. That difference is just based on empirical testing of trial and error about whether a particular complexity in fermentation, say kombucha is a parallel fermentation, so we're going through two subsequent fermentations at the same time. There's a bit more processing, a bit more influence by the microbe. Sometimes that works well for a particular substrate. Sometimes we find for that particular project, something like a vinegar fermentation will work a bit better. 5 seconds to look at how vinegar's made. When we're creating flavor and both creating sort of the process of doing fermentations, I tend to think of it in a very visual sense, which I also referred back to in my former literary degree. So we think of it as a narrative arc. I think this also creates a visual sense of how the fermentation curve in terms of applying different stressors or food substrates creates a curve which is producing flavor compounds. We also think of that as essentially high points and low points, and taking someone on a journey with us and evoking a sense memory through flavor. Very quickly, this is why we use alcohol, even though we consider ourselves a flavor company. Each one of these H's is a hydrogen bomb, which is essentially like a piece of Velcro or a very sticky hook, which bonds to other organic compounds, that is, flavors. So this is a fancy little graph proving that alcohol is a great way to preserve flavor. This is what Andrew spends the bulk of his day doing. This is just how we sort of separate the cuts. But this is sort of what, touching back on what Chris was saying earlier, when we separate the distillation of something like habanero vinegar, you get the skin of the habanero, and then you get almost like a fruit tone, and then a green tone, and then the tone of the seeds. Then you get often weird tones like melon tones. By cutting the distillation into, say, 50 cuts in the hearts, it allows us to actually dial in the flavor. And as I've run completely out of time, sorry guys. Oops. This is the team of women and men at Empirical Spirits, and I'd just like to say thanks to them because they're the heart and soul and of everything that we do. So, thank you very much.